I opened the email in the same numb way I checked my inbox every morning, one hand on my chipped mug of black coffee, the other absently scrolling past university memos, automated HR pings, and a calendar invite for another useless staff meeting about lab budget cuts. It was a Tuesday, and already it felt like the week had been dragging its feet across my back since Sunday. The subject line stood out not because it was bright or in all caps, but because it was from Gregory. My brother never emailed me unless he needed something, which usually involved me babysitting his self-importance. Family reunion invitation, Morgan Lake House, August 15th. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to feel something. The last time I'd been at that lake house, I was 32 and still finishing my third failed grant proposal. Gregory was already pulling in six figures, Sarah had just bought her second condo, and my mom kept introducing me to people as our little genius, still playing with mice. But fine, sure, I opened it. The message was full of the usual Morgan family BS. Formal greetings, talk of tradition, Uncle Don's signature phrase about uniting the branches of the tree, and a full schedule that looked like it was written for a damn corporate retreat, kayaking at 10, group photos at noon, dinner dress code smart casual. But it was the note at the bottom that hit me like a cold slap. P.S. Please note this year's event will be a celebration of high achievers in the family. Due to limited space, attendance will be prioritized for those who have reached significant professional milestones. I blinked. Read it again. Then laughed, quietly, like something cracked inside me. I didn't need a translator to understand that one. They didn't want me there. Or rather, they didn't think I'd earned a seat. I could already hear the justifications they'd throw at me if I asked, some sanctimonious crap about limited rooms, or how it's not personal, just in line with the theme. Like it was a party for executives, not your own damn blood. For a moment, I didn't move. The email just sat there, open on my screen, that smug little line sitting at the bottom like a taunt. It didn't even piss me off. Not really. I'd been the family disappointment so long it was like second skin. The kid who stayed too long in school, the man who kept chasing maybe results and lab breakthroughs instead of mortgages and country clubs. The truth is, I had gotten used to being overlooked, spoken over, and left out. It was a quiet kind of pain, one that didn't scream, it just settled in your bones. My apartment smelled like coffee grounds and exhaustion. The radiator clicked in protest even though it was late spring. I lived above a garage in a neighborhood where half the streetlights didn't work, and you learned real quick not to leave your bike unlocked. I didn't own a car. I didn't have kids. And the last relationship I'd had ended with the words, "I can't live in the waiting room of your life anymore." But I had the lab. God, I had that lab. Cramped, underfunded, falling apart at the corners, but it was mine. We were working on something that felt like it mattered, even if nobody else saw it yet. I knew every inch of that place like a lover's body, the busted fridge that rattled when you slammed it, the peeling labels on the reagent bottles, the Godofel chair with the one short leg I never bothered to fix. There was beauty in the mess, in the obsession. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed at the lab, hunched over data that kept whispering potential. A new trial round had shown something strange, and if the pattern repeated, we might be on the edge of something that had eluded better-funded teams for a decade. I didn't dare say it out loud. In this world, hope was dangerous. Results mattered. Numbers. Survival rates. Reproducibility. Not dreams. Dr. Rios came in around midnight, still in her lab coat, carrying a half-eaten apple and that look she always had, equal parts curiosity and frustration. She glanced at the screen, then at me. "You're still here." I shrugged. "You're still eating fruit after midnight. We all have our vices." She leaned over, narrowed her eyes at the graph I was obsessing over. "Is that?" She didn't finish the question. I nodded slowly. "If the trend holds tomorrow, we're not just slowing progression. We're talking reversal. Maybe even regression," she finished, voice low. Jesus. There was a pause between us. Not the awkward kind, but the heavy kind. Like something had just shifted and neither of us wanted to breathe too hard in case it disappeared. Then she smiled, barely. "They don't see you now," she said, softly. "But they will." I didn't say anything, just nodded, and saved the data twice. The next morning, I opened the reunion email again, just to stare at it. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to feel something triumphant. Maybe I wanted to imagine replying with a PDF of the lab results and a photo of me flipping them the bird. But I didn't reply. I just sat there, rereading the phrase, "for high achievers only," over and over like a punchline I'd finally learned to stop laughing at. And you know what? That was fine. I closed my laptop slowly, the plastic edges warm from overuse. I whispered to myself, "Let them have their little party," and turned back toward the microscope, the hum of the machines in the background the only applause I needed. And in that silence, something inside me locked into place. Not bitterness, not pride. Just clarity. The lake house hadn't changed in 20 years, except for maybe the new addition Gregory paid for last fall and the fresh stain on the wraparound porch that Sarah insisted made it pop for the photos she took and posted to her real estate Instagram account. From the gravel driveway to the goddamn monogrammed linen napkins on the patio tables, the place practically bled old money vibes, the kind of upper-middle-class grandeur that tried too hard to say, "We've made it," without saying a single true thing. Inside, the family had gathered early, wine glasses in hand, and the mood already so thick with self-congratulation it was like trying to breathe through syrup. Gregory was mid-toast, holding court near the fireplace like a damn senator. His voice carried across the room, clear, smooth, practiced from years of litigation and media training. "To a fantastic year," he said, raising his glass as if he were baptizing them in champagne. "To promotions, to milestones, and to being Morgans. Let's never forget, we don't just carry the name, we elevate it." Helen clapped like a trained seal, eyes shining with pride, so forced it looked like it hurt. She leaned in toward Aunt Marianne and whispered, too loud for subtlety, "Gregory's third promotion in 6 years. He's practically running the firm now." As if on cue, Sarah giggled with that high, tinkling sound she always used when fishing for compliments. She pulled out a glossy trifold brochure from her designer purse and started handing them around like it was a goddamn product launch. "These are my new listings," she said, tone dripping with polished enthusiasm. "I just closed 2 in Oak Brook and 1 in Wilmette last week. Market's insane right now." Uncle Don was on his second gin and tonic and already telling a story he'd told a dozen times before, some half-true tale from his Navy days that got more exaggerated with every glass. "Now see, back in '89, we were tracking a Russian sub near Guam," he began, puffing out his chest like an old rooster. "You gotta be tough out there. No room for weak stomachs. Not like little Eli, remember when he cried during that squirrel dissection in 7th grade? The room burst into laughter. Not cruel, exactly, but casual, the kind that burns hotter because it doesn't even see itself as mean. Just family fun. Just poking the soft one. Just another story in the file of Eli moments they rolled out whenever they needed a chuckle that wouldn't offend anyone in their high thread count bubble. No one mentioned he wasn't there. No one said his name after that. The toast moved on to Sarah's sales awards, to Gregory's new Tesla, to Helen's bridge club, and Don's gout. Outside, the sun set perfectly over the lake like it was in on the act, casting golden light on a family portrait that had already decided who got to be in the frame. Have you ever been made to feel like an outsider by your own family? Like no matter what you do, it's never enough? Let me know in the comments if you've been there. Meanwhile, 23 miles away as the crow flies and a whole different universe away in every other sense, Eli was hunched over a cluttered lab bench, blinking back the sting in his eyes from hours of fluorescent lighting and tension. The lab smelled like old coffee, ethanol, and the distinct, sharp tang of sterilization. Outside the building, night had already claimed the city, but inside, Eli was caught in that strange loop of obsession and exhaustion that only science could deliver. The mice had been injected 2 weeks ago. Results were due any day. And honestly, he hadn't slept a full night since Tuesday. He clicked through another data set on his computer, barely registering the blinking green cursor or the list of unread emails piling up in the corner of his screen. One in particular from the FDA liaison made his stomach twist. Still no official green light for human trials. Still more data required. Still the same polite roadblock dressed up as protocol. Dr. Rios had left hours ago after a half-hearted attempt to get him to take a break and go home. "You're not gonna brute force your way into a miracle," she'd said, rubbing her temples. But she didn't argue too hard. She knew what this meant to him. She knew, better than most, that this wasn't about a line on his CV. This was about proof. Proof he wasn't crazy. Proof he wasn't wasting his life. Proof, maybe most importantly, that his family had been wrong about him all along. He stood up, stretched his back, and wandered to the temperature-controlled cages where the mice rested. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out the observation charts. Something was off. No deaths in the last 72 hours. Not just no deaths, but improved mobility in the subjects. One mouse had grown back a patch of hair over the injection site. Another had gained weight, something that never happened this late in the protocol. Eli blinked and reread the figures, then checked again. He opened the cage slowly and watched as one of the mice ran in smooth, healthy circles like it hadn't been dying from metastatic cancer just 2 weeks ago. His breath caught. Not in a dramatic movie kind of way. Not gasping. Just a quiet pause. A stillness. Then he whispered, as if afraid speaking too loud might jinx it, "Holy shit, this might actually work." He didn't jump up and scream. He didn't call anyone. He didn't even smile. Not yet. The weight of maybe was still too heavy. But something had shifted. The air felt different. Like something enormous was waking up under his feet. And back at the lake house, the fire crackled, the wine flowed, and no one had the faintest idea that the man they'd left off the guest list was on the verge of changing everything. It's a strange thing, being present in a room full of people who don't actually see you, and stranger still when those people share your blood and your name and your old childhood photos. Yet they treat you like some kind of hazy ghost at the edge of their perfect family portraits. I remember one Thanksgiving, it must have been 15 years ago, when they lined us all up for the annual Morgan Group photo, everyone smiling too wide with too much wine and turkey in their stomachs. And I had gone inside for barely 2 minutes to check on the timer for the sweet potatoes. When I came back out, the photo had already been taken, everyone was already scattering, and someone, I think it was Aunt Teresa, looked at me and said, "Oh, Eli, were you in the bathroom?" And then laughed like it was a punchline instead of the truth. Mom said not to take it personally. "You wander off too much," she told me. "We can't wait forever, sweetheart." But they had waited for Gregory to change his tie. They had waited for Sarah to redo her lipstick. They had even waited for Grandpa's ancient spaniel to stop humping a pillow in the background. But for me? No. I was invisible the moment I stepped out of frame. I had gotten used to hearing the word eccentric tossed around like a compliment with thorns attached. Uncle Don once called me the thinker of the family, while chuckling in the same breath about how I probably couldn't change a tire. My cousins always asked if I was still playing scientist or if I'd finally joined the real world. The real world, to them, meant salaries, mortgages, job titles with words like vice president or director in them, not sleepless nights in a lab or journal rejections or living off stipends that barely covered rent. They called my work noble, which is usually what people say when they don't think it'll ever pay off. Claire called that night as I was pacing the lab's back hallway, unable to sleep and too wired to think straight. Her name popped up on my cracked phone screen like a memory I hadn't allowed myself to miss. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not really, not since the divorce papers were signed quietly over lukewarm coffee and silence in a lawyer's office that smelled like printer toner and tired dreams. "I saw your name," she said, voice soft, cautious, familiar in a way that hurt. "Rios presented something at the oncology symposium. Something about T-cell modulation? They mentioned your name, Eli." I leaned against the wall, heart thudding like it had forgotten its rhythm. "It's early," I said, voice tight. "Too early to call it anything." She paused for a second, then sighed in that way she used to do when she knew I was deflecting. "I never doubted you, she said, and I could hear the truth in it, even if it arrived too late to change anything. I just couldn't keep waiting forever." And there it was, that familiar ache in the middle of my chest, the one that came from knowing I had traded something real for a someday that might never come. She was right to leave. She needed more than test results and hope. And I had nothing to give her then but both. After we hung up, I sat in front of my computer for over an hour, staring at the compiled data from the last trial batch. The survival curves weren't just promising, they were shocking. The immune response levels in the test subjects were off the charts. If I sent this data to the review board, it could mean early access approval for clinical trials. It could mean funding. It could mean attention. But it could also mean scrutiny, risk, public pressure, and 100 ways for it all to blow up before it even began. I hovered over the send button, my finger trembling slightly above the trackpad. One click and everything could change. Or nothing could. I had lived so long in the limbo between almost and never that I didn't know what certainty felt like anymore. And then the screensaver kicked in, and my reflection blinked back at me, tired eyes, wrinkled shirt, 2-day stubble. The invisible man, debating whether to finally be seen. Back at the lake house, the party had moved to the fire pit outside, and the family was 3 drinks deep into self-congratulation. Gregory was passing around cigars, real ones this time, not the fake Cuban knockoffs he used to buy in college. Helen sat bundled in a cashmere throw, swirling a glass of white wine and talking about Sarah's new listing that had just made the Wall Street Journal's Hot Properties section. Don was in rare form again, telling some story about his high school football days, and someone, I think it was Sarah's husband, made a joke about how Eli was probably still curing rats in a basement somewhere. They all laughed. It wasn't malicious. Just routine. Just easy. Midnight rolled around in the lab like a quiet guest sneaking in the back door. I had finally sent the damn email, click send, and felt the rush of panic and relief wash over me like cold water and fire all at once. The report was gone, off to the review board, off to people who could actually see what I saw. There was no taking it back now. That's when Dr. Rios called, breathless, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "Eli," she said, skipping hello, skipping formality. "They're publishing it. They're publishing your name, front page. Tomorrow." And, just like that, everything tilted. The morning after the email went out and the research board confirmed the publication, I woke up on the cot in my office with my neck screaming and my phone vibrating like it was trying to escape into another dimension. The window was painted in that bleached gray light that only happens when the sun is up, but the world still feels like it hasn't decided to be awake yet. My mouth was dry as hell, my back was stiff, and the air was heavy with that clinical tang of sterilizer and cold plastic. I reached for the phone, still half asleep, expecting maybe 1 or 2 missed calls from Rios or a passive-aggressive reminder from the admin about my unpaid lab equipment invoice. What I saw instead made my heart slam against my ribs hard enough to wake me up like a slap. 27 missed calls. 11 unread voicemails. 43 new text messages. The notifications were climbing like a goddamn stock ticker. I sat up fast, adrenaline rising before I even knew why. The first notification that registered in my brain was a text from Claire, short and sharp. "Check CNN. Right now." I fumbled with the browser, thumbs jittering, breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat, and there it was, staring at me in bold type beneath a massive photo of a microscope, a petri dish, and my goddamn face cropped from an old university directory picture. "Breakthrough in cancer trial could redefine immunotherapy. Dr. Eli Morgan leads revolutionary research." I blinked once, twice, as if the headline might vanish like some hallucination from too many sleepless nights and too much wishful thinking. But no, it stayed. It was real. Beneath it, a subheading with words like miraculous, unexpected efficacy, clinical potential, and my name, my full name, splashed across multiple national outlets. CNN had picked it up. MSNBC followed. Even some medical journals reposted the story with technical commentary, and by the time I made it to the lab's front hallway, someone had printed the damn article and tacked it to the corkboard with a smiley face drawn in Sharpie. The hallway felt too narrow for my feet, the ceiling too low for the weight in my chest. Meanwhile, at the lake house, the morning air was full of pancakes, burnt bacon, and mimosas poured before 10 a.m. The family had gathered around the oversized kitchen island in their usual disorganized chaos, Helen arranging fruit trays like they were being judged by Martha Stewart, Gregory already half-dressed in a golf polo and Bluetooth headset, and Sarah scrolling through her phone while complaining about property taxes. No one noticed anything out of the ordinary until Gregory's phone buzzed first. He looked down, blinked, then straightened like someone had pulled a string in his spine. "Wait, hold on," he said, stepping away from the table. His voice shifted from morning casual to boardroom formal. "Is this real?" Then Sarah's phone pinged. Then Helen's iPad chimed from the counter. And within 30 seconds, the room was full of that buzzing, chaotic, hungry energy that only happens when a family realizes the world is suddenly talking about someone they've forgotten to invite. Helen leaned forward, squinting at the screen, her glasses perched on the edge of her nose. "That's our Eli?" she asked, as if the headline might be lying or misprinted or attached to a different Eli Morgan who hadn't spent their life being the soft one, the invisible one, the one who didn't make the photo. Gregory was quiet for a second, then muttered, "He never told us." There was something sharp in his voice, not quite guilt, and not quite disbelief, like he was trying to calculate whether he should be angry or impressed. Sarah didn't even look up. She just said flatly, "Why would he?" And maybe that was the only honest thing anyone said all morning. By noon, the group chat that hadn't mentioned my name in years was full of links, reaction gifs, and passive-aggressive messages like, "Wow, Eli really pulled this off, and always knew he had it in him." Helen wrote something about how his father would have been so proud, which was hilarious, considering Dad once told me I'd wasted my 20s chasing pipe dreams with pipettes. They couldn't believe I hadn't told them. They couldn't believe I'd done something worth headlines. But what they really couldn't believe, deep down, was that I had done it without them. Without their praise, without their money, without needing their permission to matter. I didn't answer any of the calls that came in. Not Claire's second message. Not Rios, though I knew I'd owe her a drink or 5. Not even the university PR rep who was already trying to schedule interviews. I walked out the back of the lab, into the alley behind the building where the delivery trucks dropped off dry ice and nitrogen tanks. I just stood there under a low sky, feeling like someone had finally unzipped a weighted suit from my skin. Gregory called once more that afternoon, just one more ring among the dozens. I stared at the screen as it buzzed, and for a second, I considered picking up just to hear what his voice sounded like when he didn't have the upper hand. But I didn't. The call rang once, then straight to voicemail. By the time the morning fog had burned off and the story had settled into the bloodstream of the internet like caffeine in an exhausted body, the Morgan family was already doing what they did best, spinning narratives, rewriting timelines, polishing the past until it looked like something they'd always wanted it to be. It started with a single Facebook post from Helen, typed out carefully with her long pink fingernails clacking against her tablet as she sat by the lake, sipping coffee from a mug that read "Number 1 Mom" like some twisted joke only the universe was in on. The post was simple and completely transparent to anyone who knew how that woman's mind worked. "So proud of our brilliant son, Eli, whose dedication to medical science is now being recognized by the world. His late father always knew he would do something great. Hashtag proud mom, hashtag breakthrough, hashtag family legacy." Within minutes, the comments rolled in from family friends, ex-neighbors, women from her book club who hadn't seen me since I was in braces and couldn't remember if I had gone to Yale or just some science college out east. There were heart emojis, congratulations, he's a genius, proclamations from people who once told Helen I should consider switching to accounting, just in case. Aunt Teresa posted a cropped version of the CNN article with a caption that read, "Our Eli knew he'd make headlines someday." And my cousin Jared, who once mocked me in front of his friends for looking like a virgin with a microscope, posted a picture of us from a family barbecue in 2006 with the caption, "Me and the legend himself." At first I didn't react. I just sat in my office chair, watching it all unfold like I was at the center of a tornado, completely still while everything spun wildly around me. The lab was unusually quiet. Dr. Rios was in a meeting with university PR, probably fielding interview requests and planning press kits that neither of us had any appetite for. My inbox was a war zone: reporters, biotech investors, pharmaceutical reps, foundations offering grants with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. And in the middle of that chaos, one new email came in with a subject line that hit harder than any of the others, from Gregory Morgan. Subject: just wow. I opened it even though I knew I shouldn't have. His words were short, professional, and steeped in the same insincerity that had defined our entire adult relationship. Eli saw the article. Incredible work. Honestly, we always knew you had it in you. Let's catch up soon. Maybe we can talk about how to help you expand the operation. The family would love to be involved. Proud of you, little bro. I stared at the screen for a long time, not blinking, not breathing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, itching to reply with something sharp, something that would cut through the performative support and remind him exactly how he'd treated me the last 2 decades. But I didn't type anything. I closed the message and marked it unread, like it had never arrived, like none of it had happened, like that boy from the group photo who always stood at the edge could just disappear again, one more time. Later that afternoon, Dr. Rios found me alone in the break room, holding a cup of stale coffee I hadn't even sipped. She looked tired but amused, phone in hand, thumb scrolling through what must have been the growing avalanche of attention. "Your mom's on her 4th post," she said, raising an eyebrow. Each one more poetic than the last. "And I think Sarah tagged herself as your mentor on LinkedIn." I smirked, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. "They want me now because the world wants me," I said quietly, not asking, not doubting, just stating the reality we both understood. Rios nodded, her voice low and direct. "You're hot right now. You're lightning in a bottle. But the minute this stops being shiny, they'll go back to forgetting you existed. Be careful, Eli. The spotlight burns, especially when you've never had it before." There was something brutally honest in her tone, something that made me feel like I was standing on a rooftop during a storm, lightning dancing too close to my skin. I nodded, slowly. "I know." That night, after hours of dodging calls and politely declining media appearances and sending robotic replies to pharmaceutical offers dressed up as congratulatory messages, I opened my laptop, pulled up the travel site, and booked a one-way flight. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't tell Rios. I didn't tell Claire. I sure as hell didn't tell my family. It wasn't for show. It wasn't to make a point. It was because for the first time in my life, I had leverage and I didn't want to spend it asking for a seat at a table that had always been happy to eat without me. I hit confirm on the flight, closed the screen, and finally, I exhaled. The flight was quiet, too quiet in the way that early morning flights always are, filled with half-asleep business travelers and crying babies, and the hum of recycled air blowing across cabin walls like the sound of someone whispering secrets just out of reach. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep, not because I was nervous, but because there was a hum beneath my skin, an electricity I couldn't name. The flight attendant offered coffee, and I took it even though it tasted like warm regret in a paper cup. I stared out the window at clouds that looked like they'd been painted on a backdrop I couldn't touch, wondering what the hell I was flying back to and whether anything waiting for me had changed at all. By the time we landed, I already had 5 missed calls and 3 text messages from Helen. All of them carried the same tone, breathless excitement with a coating of passive ownership. "We have a little something planned tonight," she wrote. "Just a small gathering. Nothing formal, family only. Everyone is so excited to see you, Eli. You've made us all so proud." There was a photo attached, a grainy image of the backyard strung with fairy lights and white tablecloths, as if the ambience might soften the truth that none of these people had wanted me around until a news crew did. I didn't respond. I closed my phone and shoved it into my coat pocket, fingers curled tight into fists I didn't even realize I was making. There was no driver waiting at the airport, no fancy car. Just a rideshare and a quiet ride across the city as familiar landmarks blurred past like ghosts. It wasn't until we pulled onto the old road near the Morgan house that I felt the first real knot of tension in my chest, a kind of dread I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. Coming home after being caught sneaking out with a backpack full of biology books instead of weed or beer. Claire called me just as I stepped out of the car. Her voice hit me like a warm wind, soft and slow and dangerous in the way that only something unfinished can be. "I heard you're back," she said, and there was something in her voice I hadn't heard in years. "Worry. You going to the dinner?" I hesitated, not sure what to say, unsure what would sound sane under the weight of this whole ridiculous parade. "I thought I'd show up," I said finally. Figured it was better than letting them keep guessing. There was a pause, long and loaded. "You think they've changed?" she asked gently, "or do you think they just want to be next to the spotlight?" I didn't answer because I didn't know, and because I wasn't ready to hear myself admit the second one was probably the truth. When I finally arrived, I was almost an hour late, not because of traffic, but because I parked down the street and walked the last 2 blocks like I was sneaking up on a version of my past that hadn't seen me coming. From the sidewalk, the house looked almost surreal under the glow of string lights and perfect landscaping, as if someone had staged a photo shoot for an expensive lifestyle magazine called Success, with a smile. I could hear laughter through the hedges, clinking glasses, the hollow rhythm of practiced celebration. The moment I stepped into the backyard, the air changed. The noise cut off like someone had yanked the power cord. Dozens of faces turned toward me, some familiar, some aged, some wearing smiles so wide they looked like masks. And then, almost as if on cue, they started to clap. Not the polite kind of applause that happens at a dinner party when someone makes a good toast or drops a punchline. This was the full performance, loud and theatrical, a standing ovation for a man they had forgotten how to describe until the headlines did it for them. Gregory stepped forward first, glass in hand, wearing a navy blazer and that easy confidence that came with never having to doubt his own worth. "To Eli," he said, raising his drink. "To our Eli, the genius, the miracle worker, the man who made us all look like underachievers." There was laughter, too much of it, too fast. I stood there, smiling with my mouth and nothing else, feeling like I had just walked onto the set of a play I didn't audition for. Helen hugged me with both arms, her perfume as thick and cloying as her praise. "I always knew," she whispered into my ear, as if she thought I'd forgotten all the times she told me I should just settle for something safe, something simple, something stable. Sarah handed me a glass of wine, smiling like we were best friends again, like she hadn't called me a professional hermit at last year's Christmas Zoom call. "We've all been talking about how we can support the work, Eli," she said. "You have to let us be a part of it." Uncle Don patted me on the back with a force that nearly knocked the breath out of me and chuckled. "Knew you'd do something big, kid. Took you long enough, though." The food was untouched. The air was staged. The speeches were ready. I stood there for a moment, glass in hand, the backyard glowing around me like something out of a dream I didn't want to wake up in. But the dream wasn't mine. It was theirs. This was their fantasy of a family united, of success shared, of a prodigal son returning just in time to make them all feel noble and wise and part of something bigger than themselves. I raised my glass slowly, eyes scanning the crowd of people who had once forgotten to wait for me during a photo, who had laughed when I cried at a dissected animal, who had celebrated without me for years. Here's to family, I said, my voice steady, measured, sharp enough to slice through the tension they were too polite to name. Here's to family, who only show up once the cameras do. And then I drank. Because in that moment, I couldn't decide if I was toasting them or myself. The morning after the backyard dinner was quieter, but not in the peaceful sense of quiet that follows a satisfying evening. It was the kind of stillness that feels like a held breath. Like the room is waiting for something to happen and everyone's pretending they're not looking at you while they rehearse their lines in private. I hadn't even finished my second cup of coffee before Gregory knocked on the guest room door, his smile already in place like it had been ironed on along with his perfectly tailored shirt. "Got a minute?" he asked, not really asking, just assuming I'd say yes, the way he always had since we were kids, and he decided being older meant he automatically knew what was best. I followed him into Dad's old study, which had been remodeled into something sleeker, more modern, stripped of all the warmth and dust it once had when I used to sneak in there to read medical journals while everyone else was watching football. Now it was glass, leather, and a weird painting that looked like it belonged in a bank boardroom. Gregory gestured to a chair, already launching into his pitch like he was back in court. "So, I've been thinking," he began, flipping through some notes on a legal pad. "This is a huge opportunity, not just for you, but for all of us." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He took that as encouragement. We could pull together a little family fund, pool resources, get behind the research. Keep it in the family, you know? Control the narrative. There's a lot of money interested right now, Eli. You're going to have sharks circling. Wouldn't it feel better knowing your own blood had your back? The way he said it, your own blood, like it was some sacred promise, instead of the same people who left me off the reunion guest list 6 weeks ago, made my skin crawl a little. I didn't answer, just stared at the floor until he started talking about equity, ownership, licensing, and trademarks, none of which sounded like support and all of which sounded like leverage. Helen walked in halfway through, carrying a folder full of magazine clippings and printed emails from people who had apparently reached out to congratulate the family, as if their approval had anything to do with the data or the hours or the near breakdowns in the lab. "The university wants to do a press event," she said brightly, flipping through papers. "They asked if we could gather for a photo, maybe share some stories about your childhood. Isn't that sweet?" I told them I had plenty. I didn't have the heart to ask what kind of stories she thought would look good in a magazine, the ones where she made me stay in the garage because I'd spilled acetone on the carpet, or the one where she told her friend I was gifted but socially off at my 10th birthday party. She meant well, in her own twisted way, but meaning well doesn't erase the moments where you make your own child feel like a guest in his own life. Sarah chimed in via FaceTime, her makeup flawless, her tone syrupy. "We should talk branding," she said, like we were discussing a kitchen remodel instead of biomedical research. "Morgan Miracle. Catchy, huh? You could put it on merch, shirts, hats, maybe a podcast. I know a guy who does amazing logo work, super discreet." I stared at them, the three of them, like I was watching strangers rehearse a play where I'd been given the lead role without ever auditioning. My mouth opened before I could stop it, my voice sharper than I expected. "You didn't want me," I said, the words heavy like stones in my throat. "You want this." There's a difference. The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was disappointment. Not that I'd misunderstood, but that I'd said it out loud. Helen looked away first. Gregory cleared his throat. Sarah blinked slowly on the screen, her smile faltering just a touch before snapping back into place. I left the room and went to the kitchen, the only part of the house that still felt real. The tile under my feet hadn't changed since I was 12 and spent a week in here building a homemade spectrometer from a busted CD player and a flashlight. I remembered setting it up on the counter, excited, sweaty, wide-eyed, waiting for anyone, to come see. But no one had. That day was the school science fair. Helen forgot. Gregory had a soccer game. Sarah said she didn't want to go because it would be boring. I stood at my display table in the middle of the gymnasium next to volcanoes and solar system mobiles while other kids had parents cheering, clapping, taking pictures. I had nothing but silence and a third-place ribbon they didn't even ask about when I got home. That memory hit me so hard I nearly dropped my coffee cup. I turned to find Gregory standing in the doorway, waiting, watching, expecting, always expecting. "I'm not your redemption arc," I told him flatly. I was never broken. And he just stood there, blinking like maybe that was the first time it had occurred to him that I had never needed fixing in the first place. When I left the house, I didn't slam the door behind me or shout anything dramatic or make some grand gesture of finality that would stick in everyone's memory like the ending of a good movie. I just walked out, quietly, through the same side door I'd slipped through as a kid when I wanted to avoid the noise of grown-up voices and polite disappointment. No one followed me. No one called my name. The silence didn't rush to stop me. It simply wrapped itself around my shoulders like an old, familiar coat. And for the first time in days, maybe years, I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just empty. The air outside was cool, and the sky was the kind of soft gray that makes everything feel suspended, like the world's holding its breath along with you. I didn't check my phone. I didn't flag a ride or wait for permission. I just walked, step by step, away from the glowing backyard, away from the curated faces and the champagne toasts, away from the expectations that had never fit me, no matter how much I'd tried to shrink myself down to match the outline they'd drawn. It's strange what you think about in those moments. Not the articles or the headlines or the congratulatory messages still piling up in your inbox like a flood that doesn't care whether you're ready to swim. You think about the nights spent alone with nothing but your own conviction to keep you company. You think about cold coffee and cracked notebooks and broken relationships left behind like skin you couldn't carry anymore. You think about the price of ambition when it's the only thing that's ever listened to you. You wonder if it's all worth it, this mountain you climbed just to find yourself at the top, with no one around to hear the wind but you. By the time I got back to the lab, it was just past midnight. The building was quiet, dimly lit by the emergency lights that flickered softly in the hallways, casting long shadows that moved like ghosts from another life. I unlocked the door with muscle memory, not even thinking, just letting my body move through the routine like it always did. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. The machines were silent. The computers were off. The mice were gone, transferred to the university facility for follow-up studies I wouldn't be part of anymore. My name would stay on the papers, on the patent, on the record, but my place had already shifted, like the ground always does after an earthquake, leaving you standing in a space that looks the same but isn't. Claire came by just after 2 in the morning. She didn't call. She didn't text. She just walked in like she still had the right to, and maybe she did. We didn't speak right away. She handed me a coffee from the 24-hour diner down the street, and we sat in silence on the worn-out office couch where I'd slept more nights than I'd ever admit to anyone outside a therapist's office. The silence between us wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft, heavy, familiar in the way old love is, when it's turned into something else but hasn't vanished entirely. "I still think about what we lost," she said after a long time, voice low and steady, like she wasn't asking for anything, just saying it because it needed to be said. "So do I answered, not looking at her. We didn't hug. We didn't touch. We just sat there, side by side, two people who had shared something real once, now sharing a silence that felt more honest than most conversations I'd had with my family in years. Eventually she left. I didn't ask where she was going. She didn't ask me to come with her. That was never going to be the story. Ours had ended long ago, and we both knew you don't resurrect something that's already lived its truth. You honor it. You let it be. You move forward with the parts of it that still belong to you. Weeks passed. The media attention cooled like it always does, moving on to the next miracle, the next face, the next story with a cleaner ending. I didn't chase it. I didn't run from it either. I went back to teaching, smaller classes now, undergrads mostly, kids still bright-eyed and naive enough to believe science was a pure thing untouched by money, politics, and ego. I liked them. They asked good questions. They reminded me of myself before the pressure warped everything. Before the need to prove anything had burrowed so deep into my bones that I forgot what it felt like to just love the work. One afternoon, after class, I found an envelope on my desk. No return address, just my name in cursive handwriting I knew too well. Helen's handwriting. I held it for a long time before doing anything, the weight of the paper somehow heavier than it should have been. There was no glitter or Hallmark logo or printed sentimentality, just a small, neat fold sealed with tape. On the front, just one sentence. Maybe I never really knew you. Maybe now I'd like to. I didn't open it. I placed it in the drawer with old lab notes, abandoned proposals, and a photo of Claire and me at a conference in San Diego, back when the world still felt full of possibilities, and we thought love and science could coexist without burning us out. Forgiveness isn't something you owe. Sometimes, walking away is the only way forward. But do you think I was right to turn my back, or should I have given them one more chance?